Most people believe their attention is a personal trait, something you either have or you don't. You're focused or you're lazy, disciplined or easily distracted, productive or somehow broken. That belief feels intuitive, fits the way we talk about ourselves and others. It's embedded in how we judge performance at work, how we evaluate students in schools, how we measure our own worth on difficult days. We treat attention like a moral category, as if focus were virtue and distraction were sin. But it's wrong. Attention is not a personality feature. It's not a character flaw. It's not a moral virtue. Attention is a biological resource. And like any resource, it can be depleted, hijacked, protected, or restored depending on the environment it operates in. Your brain does not exist in isolation. It did not evolve in a vacuum. It evolved in response to pressure. Evolutionary pressure shaped every system you rely on, including the one that governs where your mind goes and how long it stays there. For nearly all of human history, attention was shaped by survival. Danger mattered, novelty mattered, social information mattered. If something moved unexpectedly, your brain paid attention. If someone reacted emotionally, your brain paid attention. If the environment changed, your brain paid attention. Attention kept you alive. It was the difference between noticing a predator in time and becoming prey, between recognizing a poisonous plant and eating it, between reading social cues correctly and being cast out of the group. Attention wasn't optional, it was survival. But evolution is slow, glacially slow. Evolutionary changes happen across thousands of generations, shaped by consistent environmental pressures over tens of thousands of years. Technology is not. In less than 2 decades, the informational landscape of human life has been fundamentally restructured. The modern world is not neutral to your brain. It is not passive. It is not merely there. It is actively competing for systems that evolved under radically different conditions, systems designed to notice change, to scan for uncertainty, to prioritize what might matter next. Your brain was built to detect the rustle in the grass, the shift in someone's tone, the subtle change in weather patterns. Now it's detecting notifications, updates, alerts, messages, all engineered to trigger the same ancient systems. And if you feel like your mind is constantly scattered, restless, fragmented, pulled in 10 directions at once, that doesn't mean something is wrong with you. It means your brain is doing exactly what it was designed to do, just in the wrong environment, an environment it was never built to handle. Your mind wanders more than you think. On average, humans spend roughly 30 to 50% of their waking time thinking about something other than what they're currently doing. That includes conversations, work, driving, even moments that are supposed to matter, family dinners, important meetings, moments you told yourself you'd be present for. This surprises people because we like to believe attention is the default state and distraction is the exception. We assume that being is natural and drifting away is a failure. But biologically, the opposite is true. The wandering mind is not a malfunction. It's a feature so ancient and so deeply embedded that it operates whether you want it to or not. From an evolutionary perspective, mind wandering makes sense. For most of human history, the environment was unpredictable. Food sources changed seasonally and geographically. Social alliances shifted based on resource availability and group dynamics. Threats appeared without warning: weather, wildlife, rival groups. A mind that wandered, that scanned, simulated, anticipated, was more likely to survive than a mind locked narrowly onto a single task. If you were too focused on one thing, you missed danger approaching from another direction. If you never checked your surroundings, you didn't notice when conditions shifted. If you couldn't mentally simulate future scenarios, you couldn't prepare. So the brain evolved to drift. Mind wandering allowed early humans to mentally simulate the future, replay social interactions, and anticipate outcomes. It allowed them to practice responses before threats appeared, to imagine alternative strategies, to learn from past mistakes without repeating them in real time. It wasn't a bug, it was a feature, a deeply adaptive one. But here's the problem: the modern environment is too predictable and too stimulating at the same time. There are no predators hiding in the bushes, no sudden environmental threats that require immediate physical response. Your survival is not at stake when you sit at your desk. So the brain, built to monitor uncertainty, does what it always does. It looks for novelty. It scans for what might matter. And novelty is now everywhere: notifications, feeds, updates, messages. Alerts, badges, infinite scroll. Each one offers a small possibility. This matter. This might be urgent. This might be relevant. This might be interesting. And the brain can't ignore might. Uncertainty is its specialty. Uncertainty is what it evolved to resolve. So instead of wandering occasionally, pausing between tasks to mentally simulate or rest, the mind loops continuously. It jumps from stimulus to stimulus, never fully settling, from notification to notification, from tab to tab, from thought to unfinished thought. Not because you're weak, not because you lack discipline, but because your brain is functioning as designed in an environment that never stops pulling on it, an environment that mimics the conditions that once signaled survival relevance, change, novelty, uncertainty, social signals, all delivered at a pace and volume your ancestors never experienced. Humans are not rational decision making machines. We like to believe we are. We like to believe we carefully choose our behaviors, evaluate consequences, weigh options, and act accordingly. We like to think we're in control. But that's not how the brain actually works. Humans are habit forming systems. And once a behavior repeats enough times in a stable context, the brain stops evaluating it. It stops asking whether it's good or bad, whether it aligns with your values, whether it serves your long term goals, whether it makes you feel good afterward. It automates it. This is not a flaw. It's efficiency at a neurological level. Automation frees up cognitive energy for new problems. It reduces the metabolic cost of decision making. It allows the brain to operate faster, smoother, with less conscious effort. Every automated behavior is energy saved, energy that can be redirected towards solving novel problems, processing new information, or responding to genuine threats. But automation has a downside. Once a habit is formed, resisting it costs more energy than performing it. That's not metaphorical, it's metabolic. Research on habit formation shows that behaviors can take anywhere from a few weeks to several months to become automatic, depending on how complex they are and how consistent the context is. Simple behaviors in stable environments automate quickly. Complex behaviors in variable environments take longer. But once automatic, habits run with very little conscious involvement. They don't require intention. They don't require motivation. They don't even require awareness. The cue appears. The behavior follows. That's why distraction feels effortless. And focus feels exhausting, not because focus is unnatural, but because distraction has been rehearsed. Every time you check your phone without thinking, the neural pathway strengthens. Every time you switch tasks impulsively, the brain learns that switching is normal, expected, even. Every time you relieve boredom with stimulation, the loop tightens. The association between discomfort and escape becomes automatic. Over time, focus begins to feel like resistance, like swimming upstream, like fighting against your own nature. And the brain always prefers the path that costs the least energy. Always. This is not a failure of discipline. It's not moral weakness, not a lack of willpower. It's a predictable outcome of repeated behavior in a stimulating environment. Your brain has learned correctly that certain actions relieve discomfort quickly, and it prioritizes those actions because they work, not because they're meaningful, not because they align with your goals, but because they resolve tension in the moment. And moment to moment resolution is what the brain optimizes for. If you want to change the habit, you can't rely on willpower alone. Willpower is a limited resource that depletes with use. You have to change the conditions that trigger the behavior. You have to disrupt the cue. Remove the ease of access, increase the friction between impulse and action, because habits don't live in your head, they live in the environment. We tend to assume that more thinking leads to better outcomes. If a problem feels unresolved, we think about it more. If something feels uncomfortable, we analyze it. If we feel anxious, we replay scenarios to try to gain control. We believe that if we just think hard enough, long enough, thoroughly enough, we'll find the answer. We'll solve it. We'll feel better. But the brain doesn't work like a logical engine. It's not a computer processing clean inputs and outputs. Excessive thinking, especially repetitive thinking, doesn't solve problems. It activates stress systems. Psychologists call this rumination. Rumination is not problem solving. It's looping, it's thinking the same thoughts over and over without resolution, replaying the same scenarios without new information, rehearsing the same anxieties without action. From a biological standpoint, rumination keeps the threat system active. The brain believes something is unresolved, so it stays alert, it stays vigilant. It keeps scanning for danger, for solutions, for certainty. Cortisol remains elevated. The nervous system doesn't settle, heart rate stays higher than baseline, breathing becomes shallow, sleep quality declines because the brain interprets rumination as evidence that a threat is present. If you're still thinking about it, it must still matter. If it still matters, you must still be in danger. So the body stays ready. That's why overthinking is strongly linked to anxiety, insomnia, and mental fatigue. The mind mistakes activity for progress. It confuses mental motion with movement toward a solution. But thinking harder doesn't always produce clarity. Often, it produces noise, more thoughts, more anxiety, more exhaustion. The solution isn't forcing positive thoughts, it's not affirmations. It's not thinking your way out. You can't think your way out of overthinking. The solution is reducing unnecessary cognitive input. When stimulation drops, the brain regulates itself. When information density decreases, attention stabilizes. When the environment quiets, the mind follows. This is why walks help, why showers help, why sleep helps. Not because they solve the problem directly, but because they interrupt the loop. They give the brain permission to stop scanning. Stillness isn't empty, it's corrective. It allows the nervous system to recalibrate, to drop baseline arousal, to return to a state where thinking can actually be useful again. Because the best insights don't come from more thinking, they come after thinking stops. Humans are social creatures, deeply, fundamentally social. Our survival has always depended on group cohesion, cooperation, and trust, but we are not infinitely social. Anthropological research suggests the human brain can maintain stable, meaningful relationships with roughly 150 people. This isn't arbitrary, it's not cultural. It reflects the processing limits of the neocortex, the part of the brain responsible for complex social cognition, the ability to track relationships, remember histories, infer intentions, navigate group dynamics. All of this has a ceiling. Beyond that number, relationships become shallow, transactional, and cognitively expensive. You can recognize more faces. You can exchange pleasantries with more people. But deep, reciprocal, emotionally nourishing relationships, those require bandwidth, and bandwidth is limited. That mattered less when social interaction was naturally limited, when your social world was constrained by geography, by the size of your village, your workplace, your immediate community. You didn't have to actively manage social boundaries because they were built into the structure of life. But digital platforms collapse social boundaries completely. Your brain treats online interactions as socially relevant, even when they lack depth, reciprocity, or emotional payoff. Likes feel like approval, messages feel urgent, reactions feel meaningful, comments feel like conversation, but they rarely satisfy the brain's deeper social needs. They don't replace sitting across from someone. They don't replace eye contact, tone of voice, physical presence. They don't replace the felt sense of being known. This creates a mismatch, high social stimulation, low emotional return, and that mismatch feels like loneliness. You can be surrounded by activity and still feel disconnected. You can be constantly engaged and still feel socially deprived, hundreds of connections, thousands of interactions, and still a quiet ache. Isolation isn't just emotional. It changes how the brain processes threat, trust, and attention. When social systems are overloaded and undernourished, the brain becomes hyper vigilant and restless. It scans more. It trusts less. It interprets ambiguity as threat, not because connection is missing, but because it's fragmented, spread too thin across too many shallow channels. The brain needs fewer, deeper connections, not more, wider ones. Dopamine is one of the most misunderstood chemicals in popular psychology. It's often described as the pleasure molecule, the thing that makes you feel good, the chemical behind happiness, joy, satisfaction. But biologically, that's not accurate. Dopamine is not about pleasure, it's about anticipation. Dopamine spikes before a reward, not after. It activates when the brain predicts that something might matter, that something might be worth pursuing. This distinction changes everything. Pleasure is the feeling of consumption, the warmth of eating when you're hungry, the satisfaction of completing something, the relief of safety after threat. Dopamine is the feeling of pursuit. It motivates seeking, checking, exploring, approaching. When dopamine rises, the brain becomes alert, curious, restless, forward, leaning. You feel pulled toward something, not because it will necessarily satisfy you, but because it might. This made sense in ancestral environments. If food was scarce, a brain that became energized by the possibility of reward was more likely to survive. If something might be useful, worth investigating, or socially relevant, dopamine pushed you toward it. It got you moving. It kept you searching when giving up would have meant starvation. But dopamine doesn't care whether the reward is meaningful. It doesn't evaluate quality. It doesn't ask if this will make you happy in the long run. It cares about probability. The strongest dopamine spikes don't come from guaranteed rewards. They come from variable rewards, rewards that are unpredictable. Sometimes there's something interesting. Sometimes there isn't. Sometimes it's huge. Sometimes it's nothing. But the uncertainty itself keeps the system engaged. This is why gambling works, why slot machines work, why scrolling works, why loot boxes work, why checking your phone works. Each swipe carries the same signal. The next one might matter. The next one might be the thing. And the brain is extremely sensitive to might. It doesn't need certainty. It doesn't need quality. It doesn't even need satisfaction, only needs possibility. So the system keeps going. Checking doesn't feel good because of what you find. It feels compelling because of what you might find. And that distinction between satisfaction and compulsion is everything. This is not addiction in a moral sense. It's not weakness. It's not lack of self control. It's probability math. Your brain is estimating expected value at high speed and acting accordingly. And modern digital environments are optimized to exploit that system, not maliciously, not personally, structurally. They offer endless low cost chances at relevance, infinite micro possibilities, and the brain keeps responding because that's what it evolved to do. One of the most uncomfortable truths about human behavior is this: the brain adapts faster than beliefs. You can value focus. You can believe in deep work. You can intellectually understand everything you're hearing. You can have the best intentions and still live in an environment that trains distraction. Belief does not override exposure. The brain doesn't adapt to what you want, it adapts to what you repeatedly experience. Open offices where interruptions are constant, constant alerts that fragment every task, background noise that prevents deep processing, multitasking norms that make switching feel productive, social expectations of immediate response that make availability feel mandatory. Each interruption doesn't just break focus in the moment, it trains the brain. It teaches the nervous system that sustained attention is not safe, that depth is not expected, that switching is normal. Every time attention is pulled away, neural patterns shift slightly towards shallower engagement. Over time, those shifts accumulate. The brain learns that sustained focus is unsafe because it's constantly interrupted. So it stops attempting it. It stops investing energy in something that will be disrupted. This isn't conscious. You don't decide to become more distractible. It's adaptive. The nervous system adjusts to expected conditions. If interruptions are frequent, vigilance increases. The brain stays in scanning mode because scanning mode is what the environment rewards. If attention is repeatedly fragmented, depth becomes metabolically expensive. Why invest in deep processing when you'll be interrupted in 3 minutes? So the brain does what it always does. It optimizes for survival within the environment it's given, not the environment you wish you had, not the environment you value, the one you actually occupy. This is why willpower fails. Willpower assumes the problem is internal. That if you just tried harder, wanted it more, cared enough, you'd be able to focus. But the pressure is external. The environment is exerting constant force, and force over time shapes structure. Selection pressure doesn't ask what you value, it shapes what survives. Brains exposed to fragmentation become good at fragmentation. They get fast at switching, efficient at surface level processing, skilled at juggling multiple shallow streams. Brains exposed to silence become good at silence. They learn to tolerate stillness without panic, to sit with boredom without reflexive escape. Brains exposed to depth relearn depth. They rebuild the capacity for sustained attention, for long form thought, for slow cumulative understanding. Environment is not a backdrop. It's not scenery. It's a training system. Every environment you occupy is teaching your brain how to operate. What to prioritize, what to ignore, what feels normal. Change the environment and behavior follows, not instantly, not dramatically, not through inspiration or a sudden surge of willpower, but reliably, gradually, structurally, the same way water shapes stone, not through force, but through repetition. Focus does not return through motivation. Motivation is unreliable, emotionally volatile, dependent on mood, energy, sleep, stress, and 1,000 variables you can't always control. Some days you wake up motivated, other days you don't. And if focus depends on motivation, you're at the mercy of that variability. Focus returns through constraint. Constraint sounds negative, limiting, restrictive, like loss. But biologically, constraint is stabilizing fewer inputs, clear boundaries, intentional limits. The brain relaxes when options narrow. This seems counterintuitive because modern culture equates freedom with unlimited choice. We celebrate optionality. We value flexibility. We assume that more options mean more freedom, but the nervous system doesn't experience unlimited choice as freedom. It experiences it as load, cognitive load, decision fatigue. Every option is a potential decision. Every decision consumes energy. Every choice point introduces uncertainty, and uncertainty keeps the brain in scanning mode. Should I do this or that or something else entirely? What if I'm missing something better? What if I make the wrong choice? The paradox of choice isn't just psychological, it's metabolic. Silence isn't empty. It's informationally sparse, and sparse environments allow attention to settle. They reduce the number of competing signals. They lower the baseline arousal needed to navigate the work. This is why reading works. A single stream of information, linear, predictable, no branching paths, no alerts, no sudden shifts, just one thing moving forward. This is why walking helps. Rhythmic movement, low cognitive demand, stable sensory input, no decisions to make, just movement. This is why timers increase focus. They create boundaries. They define when effort begins and ends. They remove ambiguity. You're not deciding whether to keep going. You're just going until the timer stops. Ambiguity is exhausting. When the brain doesn't know how long something will take, it conserves energy. It stays shallow. It hedges. When the brain knows the limits, it stops scanning. It commits. When scanning stops, depth becomes possible. Constraint is not punishment. It's not deprivation. It's permission. Permission for the brain to stop searching, to stop evaluating, to stop comparing this moment to all possible alternatives. Constraint says this is the boundary. Within it, you're free, and paradoxically, that freedom, bounded freedom, is where focus lives. Flow is often described as mysterious, rare, almost spiritual, something that happens to you if you're lucky, if the stars align, if you're talented enough or passionate enough or in the right mood. But biologically, flow is predictable. It's not random. It emerges when three conditions are met: protected attention, meaningful challenge, minimal interruption. None of these require talent. None require genius. None require personality change. They require structure. When distractions are removed, depth does not need to be forced. It doesn't require willpower. It appears gradually, not dramatically, not instantly. At first, discomfort increases. The brain is used to stimulation, used to novelty, used to escape. When those options disappear, restlessness surfaces. Boredom feels intolerable. The urge to check something, anything, becomes intense. This is withdrawal. Not from a substance, but from a pattern. Your brain has learned that discomfort can be relieved instantly, and now it can't. So it protests. But if the structure holds, something shifts. The nervous system recalibrates. Baseline arousal drops. The need for constant stimulation fades. Attention stabilizes. You stop needing to check. You stop needing to know what's happening elsewhere. You become present, not because you're trying, but because there's nowhere else to be. Over time, sustained engagement becomes easier, not because you've become disciplined, but because the brain has relearned the pattern. It remembers how to do this. It just needed the conditions to practice. Depth is not a gift, it's a trained state. And as it repeats, identity begins to change, not consciously, not verbally. You don't wake up one day and announce, I am now a focused person. Behavior leads, identity follows. Non-reaction becomes familiar. Stillness becomes normal. Presence becomes default. You stop identifying as someone who struggles with focus. You start identifying as someone who works deeply. Not because you decided to, but because that's what you do now. And what you do repeatedly becomes who you are. People often wait for identity to change before behavior does. They wait to feel focused. They wait to become disciplined. They wait for motivation to arrive. They wait until they feel like the kind of person who could do the thing before attempting the thing. But the brain doesn't work that way. Identity is not a prerequisite, it's a consequence. Identity is a narrative built after behavior repeats. It's the story the brain tells to explain what it sees you doing. People don't become focused and then act differently. They act differently until focus becomes who they are. Ignoring a notification, staying with boredom, continuing when stopping would be easier, choosing depth over distraction. These moments don't feel significant. They don't feel transformative. They feel small, unremarkable, ordinary. But biologically, they're everything. Each repetition strengthens a pathway. Each non reaction reduces noise. Each boundary reinforces expectation. Each moment of choosing differently updates the brain's internal model of who you are, not dramatically, not all at once, but gradually, cumulatively. Over time, the brain updates its model. This is what we do not as an affirmation, not as a goal, as an inference. As an observed pattern, you're not trying to be disciplined. You're just someone who does this now. Personality is not fixed. It's not hardwired. It's not determined by genetics or childhood or some immutable core. Personality is accumulated behavior. It's the sum of what you do repeatedly in response to the environment. And what you repeat, you become, not because you deserve to, not because you're special, but because repetition is how the brain builds identity. This is liberating because it means you don't have to become someone else before you can act differently. You just have to act differently. And if you do it enough times, identity will follow, not as something you notice. One day you'll realize, I don't struggle with this anymore, not because you conquered it, but because you stopped rehearsing it. The brain does not resist change, it resists uncertainty. When structure is present, adaptation follows, always, reliably. Not because you want it to, but because that's what nervous systems do. Distraction is not evidence of failure, it's evidence of learning. Your brain learned to respond to the environment it was given. And learning can move in either direction. The same systems that adapted to constant stimulation respond just as reliably to quiet limits and continuity. The same plasticity that fragmented your attention can restore it. Nothing needs to be forced, only arranged. Attention does not reappear through effort. It reappears when the conditions that fragmented it are removed. If your attention feels fragile, it's not because you lack discipline. It's because discipline was never the controlling variable. Discipline is what you use when the environment is working against you. But if you change the environment, discipline becomes unnecessary. Attention is not a trait you summon, it's an outcome produced by conditions. The modern world trains fragmentation because fragmentation is profitable. Engagement metrics reward it, business models depend on it, platforms optimize for it. Your brain adapts because adaptation is what it does best. It's what kept your ancestors alive, and it's what's fragmenting you now. Nothing here requires self blame, nothing requires shame. Nothing requires force. The same biology that learned to chase novelty can relearn how to stay, not through resistance, but through removal, not through motivation, but through structure, not through willpower, but through environment. When inputs narrow, attention stabilizes. When noise drops, clarity returns. When boundaries repeat, identity follows. When the environment stops training distraction, the brain stops producing it. Focus is not something you find by trying harder. It's something that emerges when the environment stops pulling you apart. Your brain is not broken. It is not weak. It is not defective. It is responding correctly to the conditions you've placed it in. Change the conditions and the response changes with them. Not overnight, not magically, but inevitably. The brain follows the environment, always. And the environment is the one thing you can control. Not completely, but enough to matter, enough to start. Enough to notice over time that something has shifted, not because you became someone new, but because you stopped rehearsing who you were. Your attention was never lost. It was just waiting for the noise to stop.